So this is the UX side of the project, the concept development and presentation. So the first thing I did was identify typical key stakeholders for the use of a pizza site slash app. And what I talked about here was that the typical users of those are the people who use the likes of Just Eat, Deliveroo, or things like the previous sites that I studied, like Dublin Pizza Company, Base Pizza, and Boojum. So through this, I came up with a client persona. My client is my key stakeholder client is called Paul Z. He is a 32-year-old who's inherited some money to invest in this pizza company. He has an idea of what he wants in terms of design for the site slash app, and basically from that, he already has a bit of a concept in mind, but I've put together a series of survey questions for Paul to get some user feedback to determine what the site's going to look like so that I can get to work on wireframing and prototyping. I won't go through every single question here, but basically, the idea with my survey questions was to um, get as accurate feedback as possible from Paul in order to shape the wireframes in the next step. So, what he values, how he wants the buttons laid out, things like that, things like navigation, just values and things like that. Features that he typically likes in a catering site. So he likes a lot of food imagery, so I have to take that into consideration. Um, and basically, this is to shape the the wireframes, which is the next step. So slowly going through them. Um, I think it is basically putting together the kind of fonts that he wants, especially for the logo, the way that he wants the functions laid out, the different pages laid out, whether he wants, what they are, for example, about, menu order, contacts, even a locations page. So from this, yeah, I'm going to determine two different types of wireframes, two different examples for Paul to choose from, and then we'll move on in the process. So I developed two wireframes, wireframe A and wireframe B, using Draw.io. The first one is basically has the logo on the top, and vertically displayed are the buttons, as well as what's going to be here is background imagery of the pizza site. So next you have order. Uh, Again, background imagery, navigation is important to Paul, so I put this home tab on every button. The footer here as well has the contents floated left and spaced out for a wide screen. So here we have a menu, three different divs here for the menu, three different types of foods, preferably, and maybe a specials. Again, you can see the footer here going across, spacing out the social media links and the contact email. We have an about page here as well, which I think will be the first one. And then finally, we have the locations. So this is all done on Draw.io. This is the first example, wireframe A. Wireframe B, the biggest differences are that we have a nav bar here with all of the buttons. We have again, same kind of background imagery. In the hero section, we'll have the logo in the middle, and in the footer, which will be the same sort of color, we have basically the social media closer together, which is the biggest kind of difference in the footer. In terms of navigation, we have the main menu function here rather than the home page. There's a bigger kind of menu than in Wireframe A, which is just the one continuous sort of page, which is an option. And the colors are slightly different in Wireframe B than A, because what he wanted as a client was a contrasting grey to an almost white uh, sort of um, color contrast, and what he wanted uh, from the user feedback that I got was for the food imagery to actually be most of the color of the site. And so I've tried to incorporate all of these different background images into all of the various pages to give it a good splash of color and to show off the 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 food that they're offering it. It says pizza. So from this, I developed two kind of prototypes, again using Draw.io. This is just a slightly more detailed version of what I've done. Background imagery, put a bit more detail into the actual icons here at the bottom. Um, so this is prototype A. Again, we can see the similarities. We have the home page. The Zed's Pizza logo is in the freestyle script text as the client wanted. So we're seeing a little bit more detail in the prototype version of A and also of B. Again, just a bit more detail in the icons and the logo. Prototype B, again, a little bit more emphasis on the details. Again, the closer together icons in the footer, the nav bar on top, with all of the same functions, obviously, as Prototype and Wireframe A. Again, the only real difference is the main menu rather than the home page here, where there's a contrast of the color. So on Wireframe A, I might use gray here and white here, or for the logo, sorry, and for the div background. And then on Wireframe B, I might flip those two colors. And again, we just have the same background imagery uh, in the background. It could be different images on different pages, or it could be the same. We'll see. So here is the slightly more detailed version that I did on Marvell. This prototype showing what the page is likely to look like using the actual image from Unsplash that I used. So hopefully Paul is happy with that. The font is up for debate. It may not necessarily be the font he's looking for, but we see again the footer at the bottom splayed across for the desktop kind of background. So basically for this, with the prototype, after showing this to Paul, we got some feedback from him saying that he requested different backgrounds and different pages, which I've taken note of. So from then on, I went to the iteration stage of the process, looked at what I had so far, which is a kind of more basic version with the same background, no hovers or anything over the buttons, which is another thing that I got from the client. So he wants some feedback. So I've iterated on that, improved the background, put hovers over the buttons, and basically any other feedback which can be changed at any time. And then just going over the design process here, just summing it up sort of from the survey to the wireframing that I've talked about before, to prototyping, and then of course to the development, which I'll talk about next. So here we have the development side. Um, so basically, this is what it's looking like. Here's the link to the actual site, which is hosted on GitHub. What I did was I conducted a audit of the site using Lighthouse, and I was able to get some results for that and compare them to the previous ones that I had studied, for example, Boojum Base and Dublin Pizza Company here. So it scored a fairly good 95 on performance, an 89 for accessibility, and an SEO score of 64. So with that in mind, I took into consideration the fact that I'm going to need to put some metadata into it and just make it a little bit more custom towards people looking for pizza sites in Dublin. And also the reason that it may be slower than these kind of sites is because the background imagery is massive on them. So I'm going to have to reduce the size of the images, compress them on Photoshop or something like that, and then bring them down to fit the screen correctly. And then that should speed up the process once it's hosted. Talked about the development process here. Again, feedback from Paul, the different pages. So I have an index page here, and using Notepad++ is what I used to develop the site. And basically I've shown little snippets of the HTML and the CSS, the classes that I've developed for them, some of the button functions here. So the footer is consistent to all of the page, which has like the contents of it, which are floated left, and the social media and things like that. On the about page, again, talked about a different URL image, talked about the class that I created for it, which is called about, H3 headings, paragraphs. You can see the CSS there, which is the div which all of the information is contained, including, and you can see it there in the HTML, there's different images and things like that. Moving on, we have the menu. And in the menu is probably the most detailed one. I have the .men CSS there, which is basically going to show the three different sections of the menu. And within those, I have the different types of pizzas. I have a div within a div, which is the allergen information at the bottom. So in the order page, it's just basically the two different functions which are within the div, which is delivery and collection. Contacts page is quite straightforward. It is a centered div, which has things like emails for joining the team, so recruitment. It has a phone number, has other functioning emails in there as well. The locations was the most difficult one for me because it contained a lot of different divs, which were again floated left. It basically made two different rows of them. The buttons were created making the back. Yeah, so I basically created 6 different locations. Used padding to extend the size of the buttons, and then made the background invisible, and then put a hover over them for a nice hover feature, which the client was looking for. Now looking at the site itself, this is it. It's hosted on GitHub, zedspizza.com. We have an about page here, as I talked about. Basically, we have our background imagery from Unsplash. I have a centered div of information how we got started, where we are now, using different images as well, and using the same footer as talked about before. We have a home page here, navigation here, which has a hover over it. In the home page itself, we have hovers over all of the buttons with the color that Paul requested. And again, we have my menu page, which has the allergen information, has the stone baked, Zed's classics, and Zed's sides, and then dips and things like that. So put a bit of detail into that, so there's a good variation in there. Again, some of the pages will have different background images. Some of them will have basically the same as the home page. Again, like I talked about before, the order page is just the two different functions here. The contact page is just a div again with the different information that I talked about before. Again, a different background image. The three different emails there, and a number. And then finally we have the locations, which has the 6 different locations that I've decided Paul is going to set up shop. These are all hover function buttons like I talked about in the development section. And then I'll quickly show you the code, which is an index with all of the buttons there vertically laid out. This is all created within a div, main menu div. We have a footer here with different social media buttons and contact information, which the client wanted on all of the pages. So going back to, this is what the about page looks like. Again, that class about that I was telling you about, and it has within that we have H1s for the logo, H3s for the subsections. We have our images here for the different paragraphs, and again the footer at the bottom. We have the order page, again different class, order box, and then there's the two different buttons that I was telling you about earlier, and again the footer at the bottom. We have the contacts, I think is next. Yeah, contact simple enough. So your three different emails here, contact class here, and the different background image again. And then finally the locations, which has the 6 different locations, which are all different divs, and basically, as I talked about in the CSS, which we'll have a quick look at here, are floated. You actually see the locations there. So there's locations 1, locations 2, and they make up the 6 different divs, and I just attributed different things to that, like color, obviously none, like padding, and then hover functions. So here we have all of the classes that are made for the different pages, like home page, buttons for a home page, body, backgrounds. These are all the different background images. Then we have our order box. And then finally just contacts, things like that. And there's the menu one there. There's the allergen one next to it, which is a div within a div. Then I have the imagery, and then I have the writing here, and then finally the footer information at the bottom. So altogether, that is how it's put together for the client, and it's hosted on GitHub, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.